Hi, everybody. Say hi, Gary, too.
Hi. Hi, everyone.
I'm excited to be here along with Gary Vitaka Robles, who is a mental health professional, but also is the acclaimed biographer of Icon, the lifetimes and films of Marilyn Monroe. And excited to be back with you again, Gary.
Oh, I'm so excited to be back with you again, Nina. Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, we're here for a very important reason. You know, as many of you know who have listened to us on Goodnight Maryland Radio, along with Mary Jane Gray, Leslie Kaspirowitz, and let's say April's last name right. I know, Via, right?
Vivia.
Yeah,
Vivia.
Vivia, yeah,
Accent.
April Vivia, right? And talking about the last year of Marilyn's life. And we also have a movie coming out called Goodnight Marilyn, which is casting right now, more details to follow.
Exciting.
And I know it is exciting, although it is not a factual story. It blends fact and fiction. It's a thriller noir. But without that movie, we wouldn't be looking into the real life of Marilyn. And Gary, you and I wouldn't be sitting here right now talking about Marilyn's life and really how important. And it's kind of brought us full circle to this moment, which really lends itself to your career, but also to my career too, because I'm in the transformational space. For people who know me, you know, you're a mental health professional,
Yeah,
but
we have this in common.
we do. We're all about transforming people's lives. And so over the next 5 weeks during May, Mental Health Awareness Month, we're going to be talking each week, each Wednesday, we're going to come a segment that uses Marilyn's life as a jumping off point to really talk about mental illness and addiction, but bring awareness to people's lives and hopefully to yourself, whether you're dealing with addiction or you have somebody that's dealing with addiction. This way we'll be able to heal together, because this is on the American Icon page, where healing meets life, which is really going to be what the documentary is about, dealing with the entirety of Marilyn's life, but also really getting into the stigma of what mental illness and addiction can bring to people's lives. And hopefully, if it's yourself or a loved one, you'll be inspired to get some help. So I think that's going to be really, really important. And Gary, I know you wanted to share some statistics and some of the information that you have as being a mental health professional as well.
Yeah, since 1949, May has been Mental Health Awareness Month. And this is so important because the suicide rate in the United States is huger than it's been in decades. And this is a serious public health crisis. Suicide is now the second leading cause of death for people between the ages of 10 and 34, and the fourth leading cause of death for people in middle age. So combined with that, in 2017 alone, we've had over 70,000 overdoses, which is unfortunately an outcome of the opioid epidemic. And we know that many people are self-medicating their mental health symptoms through drug and alcohol use. So these issues go hand in hand. And large portions of our community are dealing with mental illness. About 1 in 5 adults and 1 in 5 children. And I'm talking children between the ages of 13 and 18. And unfortunately, less than 50% of people dealing with mental illness are actually receiving services. And 10 years can go by from the point of onset of symptoms to when someone actually receives treatment. And that is a very long time to be living in pain.
So we want to change that, guys.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. So we want to give some resources too, because there's a national suicide prevention hotline, 1-800-273-TALK, which is 24/7. And for, you know, folks who are more comfortable using technology, especially the younger generation.
We got to go up a little bit. Go up just a little. Yeah, there we go. I love that
line.
Gary, yes.
So you can just text START in all caps to 741-741 and start a counseling intervention, get some support. And I want to make a point about LGBT youth, because they are 30% more at risk for suicide. And the Trevor Project is dedicated to support LGBT youth, and there is a phone number there as well for the youth to call. So there are services and resources available.
And that number again is 866-488-7386, just in case you need that number again. And we'll post it at the very end as well.
Yes, we
I think
will.
it's really important. So in this first segment, taken out of Mr. Gary Vataco Robles's book himself, I love it, Icon, Lifetimes and Films of Marilyn Monroe, in depth. And Gary, believe me, you have done your research. Oh,
Thank you, Nina.
When
a decade of research.
Oh yeah, I mean decade, yes. I mean, and it shows because he researched Marilyn's. In this first segment, we really want to look at her family legacy, and this is an important topic because you may have a family legacy of mental illness and addiction. And I just want to point out, Gary, I had a client whose dad suffers from mental illness, and she spent her early part of her life so in fear that she was going to get a mental illness disorder or some type of mental illness that she ran away from it. And she kept on, it was something that she didn't want to deal with. Oh, I don't want to look at it, because if she looked at it, that meant that she was going to have it and not necessarily mean that she could heal from it. And I know your heart, and I know the people that are going to be watching this today, is that if we can give you any words of encouragement, the encouragement is that it's okay to get help. That just because you have a family legacy issue of mental illness or addiction doesn't need to be your defining legacy. You can break the chain. And, so with that, I want to get into some of the questions, and it's from our, actually from your chapter 1, you go right into the her ancestry,
yes.
right? And it was interesting. You said Marilyn's pedigree was glaringly dysfunctional on many levels and included intergenerational mental illness, sexual abuse of children, broken families, absent husbands and fathers, single mothers who financially struggled, and frequently partnered with a succession of men. So when you look at her family legacy and then you bring it up to Marilyn's time, you see some of those same intergenerational issues coming into the life of Marilyn. And so again, I just want to point out that it doesn't have to be your legacy. So let's get into some of these questions. What do we know about Marilyn's family legacy? Obviously, you know a lot. So why don't you, for people that don't know a lot about Marilyn, this might be a really interesting segment.
So we can trace back mental illness in Marilyn's maternal family. So we could go back to her great-grandfather, Tilford Hogan. And late in life, he took his own life by hanging. And so he is the first person that we could track as having a mental illness, because suicide is usually always the manifestation of a mental illness. And in his era, Victorian era, going into the early part of the 20th century, he didn't have an opportunity to be diagnosed or receive treatment. He lived in poverty most of his life. So we could track it through him. And then his daughter, Della, who was Marilyn's maternal grandmother, she died when Marilyn was a baby. She died in a psychiatric institution, actually.
Wow.
And she was diagnosed with what we call back then manic depressive psychosis, which today we understand that that's part of the bipolar spectrum. And this involves episodes of major depressive symptoms and mania, episodes of mania, and sometimes a mixture of both depression and mania happening at the same time. And if the mood fluctuates severely, there could also be psychotic symptoms. So she actually died in a psychiatric facility. And then her daughter was Marilyn's mother, Gladys. Gladys was diagnosed with schizophrenia, which only affects about 1% of the population. And that illness is manifested by hallucinations and delusions. And Gladys spent most of her life institutionalized. And back in the early part of the 20th century, there were no medications that we have now where people can live very productively with all of these illnesses. There's mood stabilizing drugs now for bipolar disorder, or what was then called manic depression. And today there are safe antipsychotic disorders for schizophrenia. We also know that Gladys's brother, who was Marilyn's uncle, just took off one day and never returned home to his wife and children. And he was later declared dead because he was never located. It's most likely that he was experiencing mental illness as well and kind of took off, and we don't know what happened to him, but it's likely due to his mental illness that he became a missing person.
Wow, that's a lot. So given Gladys's upbringing, you know, and it seemed like she didn't have the most stable childhood.
No.
Do you think it is more environmental, genetic, or both in regards to mental illness and addiction?
Well, it's complex, and it's not real black or white, but we can predict someone's own experiences with mental illness through genetics. You know, we know a lot more about genes these days. Everybody's doing ancestry.com and researching their background and the DNA, and we have brain research now. So we know that the genetic link, the biological link, is a predictor. But we also know that there's environmental factors as well. So you can have a combination of all of these things going on.
Mm-hmm.
What's interesting is, like, especially in Marilyn's case, because of her mother's mental illness, her early childhood experiences were very negative. And today we understand this through the conceptualization of ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. And so if someone has a significant number of these in their childhood, it really impacts them on many levels, and this impacts their future life. So they're more at risk for substance abuse, mental illness, and physical health issues, and suicide as well. So there's a lot to be said of environmental factors and the impact of trauma, complex trauma when there's multiple traumas going on, and abuse of children as a risk factor.
Yeah, and Marilyn had so many of those as well in her life, even with her family legacy that seems like it went from generation to generation to generation. And I just want to invite everybody that may be watching Gary and I in this video blog or video podcast that it's important that you break the chain.
Mm-hmm.
And I want, if either you're dealing with it yourself or you know somebody that you love, that is, I think this is a great invitation to say, you know, how many generations do you want to have this type of impact if you're dealing with it? I know in my own life, Gary, you know, I was going to share this story is with my ex, who is a recovering alcoholic. But he is probably has on the spectrum of some type of mental illness disorder in terms of he's highly creative and kind of the attention deficit disorder where he's bouncing around, right? He's highly creative, right? And we'll talk about that in one of our other segments and what that may mean. But, you know, in terms of the self-medication, and I know with his son, the genetics are there and he's struggling with his own addiction issues. And now his son has two sons and they are 21 months and 4 years. And I said to my ex's son the other week, I said, you know, you guys as a couple, as parents, have the ability now to break the cycle.
Indeed.
To break the legacy. Are you going to do it? And I think it's really important that anybody that's watching us today, ask yourself, are you ready to break the cycle? I think that's really, really important. And what do you think that's what I would love for people to get out of this month is to be able to look at either it's a loved one or maybe it's yourself that is dealing with a mental illness or health issue, maybe an addiction, maybe together. They don't always have to go hand in hand, like we said. But I'd like them to break the cycle and get help and know that it's okay. What would you like them to get out of this?
Well, you know, with mental illness, people really need to know that it's not a weakness. It's not a character flaw. It's not a judgment. It is an illness like any other physical health illness. So if someone has hypertension or diabetes, we could talk about that openly. We could reach out for treatment. There's less fear involved. with mental illness, there's still a stigma that we need to work harder to remove. And in this day and age, this is maybe the best time in history to be facing your own mental illness, because there are so many safe and very effective treatments that we have now. We understand so much more, and we can receive interventions that don't involve medicine and medications and combinations of both, where we don't need illicit drugs to self-medicate. We have very effective medications. And sometimes it's a trial and error, which requires a really good relationship with your prescriber. But when you can fine tune it, you could take advantage of all of these really great interventions that are available today.
Yeah, and you and I were talking about this, is that Dr. Phil was on The View, what was it, last week or the week before, and he was talking about that the stigma is going away and people are being more open about it. So let's make that a reality. Oprah and Prince Harry are getting together with a documentary to bring more awareness to mental illness and mental health issues. So the time is now. We've had celebrities, including Marilyn, but more recent celebrities, which you think about, all these resources are out there, and yet we're in epidemic proportions that people are addicted, and mental health is you know, it's there, guys, and so many people, like Gary said in the statistics, are dealing with it. You're not alone. And so I think the main thing that we want to get out of this next few weeks together is that Marilyn's life, it did end with a tragedy, but our goal is to use her legacy as a point of transformation for you. And that's going to be a really important thing. So whether you are dealing with your own addiction, your own mental illness, hopefully over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be dealing with some of the topics, Gary, that we've already outlined. Why don't you share with us some of the topics we're going to be specifically dealing with in each of these segments?
Well, we're going to talk openly about different mental disorders that Marilyn experienced that people need to know more about, such as borderline personality disorder. We're going to talk about the bipolar spectrum and what that really means, and be able to recognize the symptoms of it. We're going to talk about post-traumatic stress. We're going to talk about trauma, childhood trauma, and how that impacts a person over the course of their life. And we're going to talk about treatments that are available for all of these disorders now, so that people don't have to suffer in silence for decades.
It's a really important. So if you have any questions or comments, you can either list them below this video that's posted, or if you feel more comfortable just direct messaging either Gary or myself, go ahead and do so. Or on the American Icon where Healing Meets Life page, we'll be happy to answer any questions or comments you have next week. And I'm excited to be here with you again.
I am too.
And
we want to hear from people out there.
Yeah, we certainly do. And Gary, one more time, if you want to go ahead and give us those numbers.
Yeah, the National Suicide Prevention Hotline is available at 1-800-273-TALK. If you need this, be brave and reach out. I believe in you, and I know you can do it.
All right. And as Marilyn would say to her friends, she'd always say a good thought for me. So as we close today, let's say a good thought. If you can.
We're holding a good thought for Marilyn.
Yeah, holding a good thought. Holding a good thought for Marilyn. And we're also holding a good thought for you if you're dealing with mental illness or addiction. So we'll see you next Wednesday, 12 noon Pacific. Be ready to see our next segment. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.